أن لم يره أحد ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين وهديناه النجدين فلاقتحم العقبة وما أدراك ما العقبة فك رقبة أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة يتيما ذا مقربة أو مسكينا ذا متربة ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة أولئك أصحاب الميمنة والذين كفروا بآياتنا هم أصحاب المشأمة عليهم نار مؤصدة صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم، أنت الرب العظيم الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. وهذا شهر عظمته وكرمته وشرفته وفضلته على الشهور، وهو شهر الذي فرضت صيامه عليه، وهو شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان، وجعلت فيه ليلة القدر وجعلتها خيرا من 1000 شهر. فيا ذا المن ولا يمن عليك، من علي بفكاك رقبتي من النار في من تمن عليه، وأدخلني الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم رب شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام، صل على محمد وآل محمد وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عامي هذا وفي كل عام، واغفر لي تلك الذنوب العظام فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا رحمن يا علام. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك، وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها، على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه، ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه، ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره، وحمده الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يداه، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه، ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما، إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير، مع حاجة بي إليه عظيما، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يصير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطأي وعمدي، أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وأريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا، وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبطأ عني أتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أبطأ عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك عليه. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك. كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي، والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل، وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك، مجري الفلك، مسخر الرياح، فالق الإصباح، ديان الدين، رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الإسباح ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله ولا شبيه يشاكله ولا ظهير يعاضده. قهر بعزته الأعزاء وتواضع لعظمته العظماء فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازي. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني وبحجة مونقة قد أراني فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يحتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد السائل ولا يخيب عامله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويدع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاصم الجبارين مبين الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي لم يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم أغني كل فقير. اللهم أشبع كل جائع. اللهم اكس كل عريان. اللهم اقض دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل عصير. اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشفي كل مريض. اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اقض عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر إنك على كل شيء قدير.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So you all know what I'm going to say first. Please, if you could come forward, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So for today's talk, we have Brother Hasanain Jaffer, and the topic today is digital fasting, dealing with Instagram and other drugs. Please welcome him with a salawat.
Oh man. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Mohammed, I need the clicker. Assalamu alaikum everyone. No, a very small area. I can't stand it. I'll move around on the stage. Even that, because the video is on you. Please, sorry. Okay. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. Yeah, I did ask Lynette beforehand if I can move around, but apparently I've got to stand in one place, so I'll do that. I'm very, very excited to be doing this talk today. I wasn't meant to be doing this talk, but one of the really important things I learned while preparing for this is that Lynette here is like a mafia boss. It's like impossible to say no to her. So when she asks you to give a talk, don't even try and say no. Just say, yes, sure, I will do it. But alhamdulillah, this is a topic that's quite close to my heart. Actually, one of the other things I learned, see, I'm still moving around. Is this going to be okay? It's going to be okay. One of the other things I learned is not to set a title before you've nailed the content of your talk. So if you find as we go along that the title was a little bit more what you expected than what's being presented, I apologize in advance. I promise you, though, what I'm sharing today is stuff that I have found has impacted my life and that I found really interesting and I'm really excited to share with all of you. Okay, the last 2 nights, the speakers have been talking about fasting. Okay. The speakers have been talking about fasting, and I think we hear it again and again. The link between fasting and taqwa is the most explicit link in the Quran. You know, we're told we're fasting, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in order to achieve taqwa. So I'm not going to go through the verses of the Quran that talk about taqwa or the different indications given in the Quran to do with taqwa. There are lots. The Quran gives us a lot of guidance in different ways of achieving taqwa. There is one thing which I don't think is contentious, which I think underlines all these different practices, all these different ideas around taqwa. And that is that taqwa requires what has become known in a modern context as mindfulness. It requires presence, it requires attention, it requires focus, it requires depth, right? Even from the basic perspective of getting to know yourself, you require that presence of mind, that depth of self-reflection. The problem is the really big, major, devastating, absolutely catastrophic problem is that our ability, collectively as a society, our ability to focus and pay attention is in severe decline. Now, I know what you're thinking, because when I first saw, read, heard about this, I thought the same thing. I thought, that's a bit dramatic, right? And it's true, there is a tendency, we have a tendency to make sweeping statements like this based on personal experience, which are more to do with like our aging minds or our aging bodies. An example that I love, I'm just sharing this because I found it interesting, is this phrase, nobody likes to work anymore. Nobody likes to work. You must have heard people saying that, right? Nobody likes to work anymore. It's really prevalent. People are talking about it all the time. Recently, there was a newspaper article and they were talking about how nobody likes to work anymore. But then when you really look back, there was also an article in 2014, nobody would be working 2006, nobody likes to work anymore. 99, 1979, 69, 1940. You can go all the way back to 1916, and they were saying nobody likes to work anymore. So really, when you make a statement like our ability to pay attention is in decline, you have to have some sort of evidence to show that something's different. Because people have been saying it. You know, there are records millennia ago of monks talking about how our ability to focus is in decline. But something's a bit different today. This is real. So I think one of the ways of approaching it is to think about our personal experiences. Since the advent of the internet, this trend has accelerated massively. So it's even possible to reflect on our own lifetimes and understand how our attention is in decline. When I was younger, used to be an avid reader. I don't know if you guys have heard of Enid Blyton, Famous Five, Secret Seven. The younger people in the audience looking at me like I'm completely alien. I used to read that stuff. Now my kids are getting to an age where I want to encourage that reading. And it is really difficult. Like, you're contending now with a lot more competition for their attention than we were at our age, you know? So this man is Sune Lehman. By the way, my talk is full of white male scientists. I don't know why, right? But every slide, pretty much every other slide is a white male scientist. I didn't do that on purpose. It just happened during the research. So this white male scientist, Sune Lehman, from the University of Denmark, he wanted to do a bit more research about this. So he said, okay, let's look at Twitter trends. So we're looking at Twitter trends, hashtags, things that are popular. Lots of people are talking about them. Let's look at how long do people focus on any one hashtag for. So he found in 2013, a hashtag would stay in the top 50 for about 17 and a half hours. Just 3 years later, in 2016, that was down to 12 hours. So that's interesting. That's a major decline in just 3 years. Doesn't really prove anything yet, but it is an indication of the way in which our attention spans are shrinking. So he did more research. He looked at movie tickets. He said, how long do people spend going to see the same movies in the cinema? He looked at Reddit, which has millions of data points, and looked at how long are people discussing the same issues for. Everywhere he's looking, he's finding the same trend, that over the years, people are spending less and less time focusing on any one issue. But he went further. He said, how do we analyze this over generations? We didn't have the internet more than, 30 years ago? How do we analyze this is 30 years, right? Something like that. How do we analyze this over a longer period of time? So he used Google Books. Google Books is a treasure trove. They have scanned in books from as far back as 1880. There are hundreds of thousands of books scanned in on Google Books. And he basically used a very smart computer to find topics in these books over the years. So, for example, take a phrase like no deal Brexit. No deal Brexit wouldn't have appeared in any book before 2016. Then it will have appeared in a ton of books, and then it will slowly be receding. So how long is our collective attention as a society focused on no deal Brexit? How many books are being written about it? How much is it being talked about? He did this analysis over 100 years, and he found, just like with everything else, every decade as a society, our attention span has been getting shorter and shorter. Not only that, as soon as the internet came around, that trend was accelerated massively. The bottom line is, it's true. Dwight says so, right? There has been a reduction in our ability to focus and pay attention over time. So the question is, why does it happen? So Sune has an idea about why. He says, think about how we used to receive information back in the day, right? So our ancestors didn't have the internet. They didn't have the Royal Mail. They would have had maybe town criers if they were living in posh parts of London. They might have had messengers or farm boys or someone who was bringing messages from the village, trade routes, etc., stuff like that. After the printing press came about, there might have been newspapers. You get a daily dose of information from places that are not within your eye line, etc. And then there were telegrams, other technology, not Telegram the app, but that's the only picture I could find. Okay, telegrams is in Telegram. But you know what I mean? There were other technologies that came around. The common thing is the way we received information gave us time to slow down, to think about things, to process things. Even if you were getting a newspaper every day, you would receive a newspaper, you would reflect and process what you read in that newspaper. And then the next day, you would find out what happened next. Today, Sune says, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. He goes, it's an absolute, like, ton of information flung at you from all these different apps. So if you think about in 2019, was it, when there was the terrorist incident in New Zealand where a man entered a mosque, like that happened on the other side of the world and it was live streamed to us here. It's a major, traumatic, heavy event which was live streamed to our phones. Like in the past, you could never imagine receiving something like that in that way, right? We weren't built to drink from fire hydrants. Don't ever try it, please. Okay. The question is, does this even matter? So one of the things we talked about earlier, taqwa, and I think whether even in other faith traditions, all of them have pushed towards mindfulness, towards paying attention. I've got to keep an eye on time because I didn't realize how long this presentation was until I finished it. I might have to skip some parts. But also power. Power is a really interesting concept in terms of, so if you think about the CFC issue. Do you remember hairsprays and how they're releasing CFC? So I was in school back in the day, in the 90s, there was all this talk about how aerosol sprays were releasing these chemicals into the atmosphere and it was creating a hole in the ozone layer. It was all the hype, right? At the time, the really interesting thing about that whole incident was the reaction of people. People heard about it. The industry was saying, oh, no, it's completely safe. Nothing's happening. It's really minute. It's not a big deal. And actually, people were paying attention to what the scientists were saying. And they were saying, no, this is causing a hole in the ozone layer. It's problematic. And people mobilized. They got together and they forced governments to create regulation and to limit the use of these products. And it worked. It's one of the silver linings of the climate movement, and there aren't many, believe me. But even today, the ozone layer has healed as a result of that mobilization, as a result of the pressure that people put on government. The problem now is that if that happened today, it's very likely we'd have a very different reaction to it. You can imagine it, can't you? Think about the pandemic or the vaccinations that came out after the pandemic. We didn't all get together, we did for a while, but then there was this polarization that happened immediately. And hopefully, if I get there, I'm not sure I will, but there is clear evidence as to how that polarization is actually created, designed by social media because it improves engagement. But you can imagine if the CFC issue happened today, you'd get a group of people saying, oh no, the ozone layer doesn't exist. You'd get another group of people saying, oh no, this is a campaign by George Soros or Bill Gates or someone else to try. You can imagine that fighting that would happen online, the Twitter comments, and then you'd either be, an ozone denier or you'd be a CFC softie. I don't know. You can imagine all that happening. And actually, what would probably end up happening is in all of that, industry would escape anything and the CFCs would keep getting pumped into the atmosphere. If you don't believe me, well, it's happening. It's happening now. We're in the middle of the climate crisis. It is bad. Every scientist, every report tells us again and again how bad it is. And all we can do is look at each other. And like there is this major distraction at the foundation of our society. And I don't think it's the whole picture, but I think this has something to do with it. The last one's about choice. I'm going to skip it. Ultimately, the experience of life requires that we are present in the now, present in the place that we are. It requires us to be alive to the world. And when something is taking away our attention and focus, we need to figure out what that is. Otherwise, we're not experiencing life fully. But social media is not the only cause, obviously. That would be way too narrow a way to approach this. We know it's happening. We know our attention and focus is reducing, but we also know it started before social media came around. So there are other causes, and I want to talk a little bit about all of them. The first thing we must acknowledge is that our attention and focus is not going away because we are bad people, because we use our phones too much, because we have bad diets, or because we don't sleep enough. This is not an individual person's issue. The reason it's happening collectively is because this is a systemic issue. And there are bigger powers at play here, which we'll discuss. But the feeling you shouldn't be taking away, you can take away despair, you can take away anger. Don't go away from here feeling guilty, because that is not the point at all. Hopefully, we can discuss some individual ideas, but the point of this is not to take away guilt. I think the reason why I'm sharing this is that the first step is to have an understanding, to have an awareness of the factors that are having this impact. So these are some of the causes. There are more in the book, which I'm about to talk to you. There are 12 different causes discussed, but this is the 4 that I wanted to share that I found the most interesting. The first is a lack of sleep. The second is the modern diet. The third is pollution. And the fourth is Instagram and other drugs. So we will get to that. But first, I want to just briefly go through some of these other causes. The book I'm talking about is Stolen Focus. It's a really famous book. It's I think published last year. It was on the bestseller list for a while. I would recommend it very, very highly. It's a very easy read. It's a very easy listen. He narrates the audiobook as well. And it has genuinely changed my perspective on a number of different things. Okay, so lack of sleep. Now, I'm going to whiz through sleep because I feel like it's stuff we all know already, and I want to get to the other stuff. Multiple studies have shown how this is an area that's been studied now again and again and again. We know that if you look back through the generations, every generation sleep is declining. And like our attention and focus, when the internet came around, that got much, much worse. There is a consensus also among scientists that a lack of sleep has a major impact on our ability to pay attention and to focus. This book, when I read this, it genuinely changed my perspective on sleep. I think Latifa hates the fact that I've read this book because of how big I am on sleep stuff. I'm not saying I'm great with sleep. When you have young kids, sometimes you can't be. Not everyone's in a position to sleep in a great way. But Matthew Walker, another white male scientist, gives a really good analysis of the importance of sleep and what it does. So some of the things he talks about, sleep being really vital for memory consolidation, for taking things from the hippocampus to the cortex. So when you learn a new skill, when you're doing something new, it's stored first in your temporary memory. When you sleep, that stuff gets transferred to the cortex where it's retained. That's how you learn new skills, and that's how you keep them. For memory integration, so for connecting new memories with existing knowledge, making connections between the new experiences you're having and the things that are in your long-term memory. Pruning, so literally cutting off connections that you're not using anymore, cleaning up the brain. Cleaning up the brain is the big one. There's actually, so I don't know all the technical terms, but there's fluid in the brain that's actually flushed out while you sleep. So it's literally like clearing the sludge out of your brain while you're sleeping. And when we have a lack of sleep, that doesn't happen. That buildup starts happening. And actually, it's been linked to multiple conditions, diseases, both of the brain and of the body. But I feel like this is stuff that we know, especially they're going to hate me. Where are they? Especially for kids. Like there are so many studies about the impact of lack of sleep for kids. But the real question is, why is it in decline? Why are we, as a generation now, sleeping a lot less than our forefathers or foremothers did? Well, the obvious one is the advent of electrical lighting. Our bodies evolved in order to pay attention to what light is doing, right? So when the sun goes down, we start feeling tired. When the sun goes up, we feel more awake. When electrical lighting came about, it wreaked havoc with our system. So we start seeing that change happening with industrialization and urbanization. There are sleep disorders as well that have been rising. I'm not qualified to say why that's been happening. There are some scientists who say actually that's only because of the other causes as well, but some who disagree. But I think the primary cause, if you know me well enough, you will know this was coming. The primary cause has been the advent of consumer capitalism. Because with consumer capitalism came shift work, came a 24/7 society where we were expected to produce goods and consume goods at a much faster, much more prolonged rate. Came stress and anxiety, not just the stress and anxiety of work, which did come with consumer capitalism, but the stress and anxiety that comes with credit or with not having enough money or with poverty, which all rose when consumer capitalism came around. Sleep bravado. So, like capitalist culture, we know had an impact on our culture in a number of ways, right? When capitalists generally, when something in general is beneficial to the capitalist system, it infiltrates our culture in some way. Sleep bravado is a really good example. There's this weird bravado around, I only need 3 hours of sleep. I only need 4 hours of sleep. This sort of, as if it's something to show off about, this demonization of sleep because it's unproductive, whereas actually one of the most productive things our body can be doing, and increase screen time. I mean, that's the most obvious one. Screen time, not just from the perspective of we are hooked to our phones and so keep wanting to check it and keep watching things well into the night, but also in terms of the light that's emitted from blue screens and how that impacts our sleep. But capitalists are to blame for everything in general in life, but definitely for this. We make more money when you're awake. If you think about it, the revenue streams from social media companies especially rely on how long you're looking at your. When you're asleep, they can't make money from you. When you're awake, you could be looking at ads. You could be buying something from Amazon. You could be watching something. All of that leads to them making more money. There is a general imperative on big business to keep you awake for longer and longer. And generally, when big business wants something, they find a way to make it happen. Okay, I said that was going to be quick, but I don't feel like it was very quick. 10 minutes. Right. All right. Modern diet. Very quickly, a group of scientists thank you. A group of scientists, this is Dutch scientists, they studied a group of children and split them into two groups. For one group, they tested the attention and ability to focus for both the groups. For one of the groups, they said, we're going to put you on an eliminationist diet. Basically, we're going to take away all the processed foods you normally eat. Despite the picture, this was in a Western country. So they were eating, all the normal processed foods in normal supermarkets. They said to them, we're going to take away all these foods that you're eating. We're going to take away the fast food. You're going to have whole foods, good grains, etc., etc. All the stuff that I should be eating more of. The other group were just allowed to continue their normal diet for 5 weeks. After 5 weeks, they tested them again. They found there was a dramatic improvement in the ability to pay attention and to focus, which is what they were testing for, in the group of kids who had not had any processed foods or not been eating any junk for 5 weeks. But so dramatic that 70% of them improved significantly, an average of 50% improvement in their test scores over 5 weeks. That's massive. Just think about that for a minute. I feel like I don't even need to say anything more on diet. Just taking away processed foods and junk foods from the diet of children for 5 weeks had a massive increase. Now imagine our diets and what that's doing to us collectively as society, how that's impacting our ability to pay attention and to focus. So why is our diet so bad for us? I think the pictures can do the talking here. That's how we used to eat. We used to grow our food. We used to hunt our food. And I say we, I mean the human community, not me as in my family. And now we have factory farming, we have mass-produced food, and we have fast food. This is another white male scientist who's written a great book about it, Mr. Pollen. He talks about different reasons, which I'm going to skip through, about why the diet is so bad for us. One of the important ones is the food industry. The food industry is massive and is very, very powerful. They have basically figured out how to mass produce food and shove it down our throats. They've figured out how to access our pleasure centers and then use more of the chemicals that work, more of the sugars that work, to make sure we are addicted and that foods are what they call hyperpalatable, i.e., they're very easy to eat. And that's why we see a rise in disease, a rise in obesity. It's endemic, it's everywhere, right? His mantra, by the way, is eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And he does also talk about traditional diets and cultural wisdom. He says if you turn back to your roots, and he's talking to different communities, your forefathers generally will have come up with recipes that match your bodies, that match your cultures, that match your locales. And generally they are made of whole foods, like our grandmothers wouldn't give us recipes that are to do with breaded sea bass, This is going to be good food. And again, the capitalists are very clear about this. We make money if you eat the rubbish we produce. Yeah? I'm just trying to highlight how all of this is systemic. It's not something to feel guilty about. It's something to recognize as the forces in our world that push us in certain directions. Okay, I don't feel like I'm going to get a chance to go through pollution. If you live close to a highway, that has a massive impact on your ability to pay attention. This man did a study of 3,000 children, and he found those that went to school or even walked to school through highly polluted areas, even after correcting for income, after correcting for their parents' professions, he found that their ability to learn was significantly impacted in all cognitive measurements that he did by how much pollution was in the air on their way to school and where their school was located. That is massive. And it keeps it systemic because it's not something we can easily do something about. This man fought against the lead industry. Do you remember when petrol used to be leaded, right? And the lead industry would say to us that, yes, petrol is leaded, and there's lead in the air, but lead emissions, so the emissions from cars using leaded petrol, they're safe for us. They're definitely safe for us all. But this man was a scientist. This was in the 1970s. And he said, no, lead emissions are poisoning children and reducing their cognitive function. So he had done multiple studies on this. He said, no, this isn't happening. This is a really good case study on, one, how big business works, and secondly, how we can make change as well. So the lead industry said, no, this is actual quotes from documentation. This is the fault of parents, especially Negro and Puerto Rican uncivilized parents who aren't cleaning their houses. This was their actual company line, that this is people not cleaning their houses. Take personal responsibility, clean your houses better, and this won't happen to you. This has nothing to do with all the petrol we're putting in cars because the emissions are safe from that. So he said, no, really, it's not. This is paraphrasing, obviously. So the lead industry said, okay, our scientists say, because industry always has scientists that are paid to say certain things and make certain studies, etc. Our scientists say the kids have pica, they're eating lead-based paint. I am not making this up. There were scientists in the 1970s who said there is a psychological condition that children, especially children of people of color, have, which is called pica. And pica causes children to chip the paint off walls, especially leaded paint, and eat it. And that's why they're getting lead poisoning, not because of the leaded petrol we're putting in our cars. All this was an attempt to make sure there's no regulation around leaded petrol. But at some point, the government, I've just put Biden because I feel like he must have been around somewhere at the time. At some point, the government said, maybe well, hang on, maybe there's something here. A lot of scientists are saying this now. And the industry said, well, if there's any doubt, the free market dictates we should be allowed to carry on. And the government just said, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. That's what we're going to do then. You carry on. And this went on for a while. But it changed. And it only changed when the people stood up. When people got together and mobilized and said, no, this cannot be the way. It said ban leaded products now. And suddenly, Biden's not looking so happy anymore. And he said, okay, just let me keep playing king. Because the one thing these people are worried about more than losing their election contributions are losing elections themselves, right? But this is just a case study to demonstrate how we can never trust government or big business to keep us healthy. It has never been the case, however far back in history you go. From the advent of capitalism, obviously. But what has always improved our lives is when people get together to fight for a cause. And the same applies to all the causes when it comes to what's degrading our attention and focus today. All these causes are systemic causes. And what it requires is for us to stand up, to get together, to stand up, and to ask the government to intervene and to stop allowing people to take away our attention and our focus. I'm done, aren't I? If there's any, oh yeah, and obviously capitalists make more money if we don't have to clean up. There's a lot of important points. I haven't got to the Instagram part, but I'm gonna maybe skip past most of it. Okay, there's one, okay, I'll make a couple of points and then I'll stop. So social media is probably today the number one factor. Yeah, you're probably asking why I left this till last now, aren't you? But it is today probably the number one factor that's affecting our attention and our ability to focus. Social media companies make their money in two ways in the main. One is engagement. Engagement, even, so Tristan Harris, there was a picture of him earlier and there was a magician's hat. You'll never know what that's about now because I don't have time to explain. But Tristan Harris used to work for Google, and he explains that the way social media companies measure engagement, all the social media companies, he was an engineer at Google, is they track how long someone's on their app, right? Now imagine a company like Google. Google is the owner of Android, so they control the operating system on your phone. And we've been saying, oh, we're not able to focus and pay attention. So they're like, oh, okay, great, here, have a do not disturb button, right? So they've given us a do not disturb button. But their very business depends on us using our phones more and more. And this is why we will never be able to trust big tech to give us digital well-being solutions, because their whole business model is about this. And it's not just that, yeah, okay, they make more money doing it, but how are they going to force us to do this? It's that they have developed technologies that hack into our brains the same way. Okay, this sounds like conspiracy theory now. In the same way that the food industry has hacked into our stomachs, right? So when we use these technologies, which have some benefits and are useful to us, they are collecting data about us as individuals. And this is the second way in which they make money, which is surveillance. This isn't that they're watching us. They don't really care what Ali Tharu is up to today or which talk is there. They care only in as much as, customer 24634, which is Ali, is interested in this or is not. I don't know if he's interested or is not interested in this or is at AMI or goes to AMI every week, because that means they know that, oh, he's local to Selly Oak. Oh, maybe he will go to this business. Maybe he will spend money here. We should sell him to this advertiser. We should sell him to that advertiser. Oh, what's he Googling? Don't tell me, Ali. But the idea is that these companies, you know, the way to imagine it, this guy, Tristan Harris, says, imagine each of these tech companies has a voodoo doll with your name on it, right? They don't care what you actually look like. They're not nosy about what you're actually doing. What they do want to do is personalize this doll with your interests, with what you're Googling, with what you're watching, with what you're interested in, because then they can sell that to advertisers. The more details they have about you, the better. But the sinister side of that is the more details they have about you, the more information they have about you, the more they're able to make you feel like what they're selling is relevant to you, the more time they can get you to spend on their phone, on your phone. The more your engagement increases, the more likely you are to watch the adverts and to buy the products. Right? It's a vicious cycle. He says, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Okay, I think we're going to have to call it a day there. I will say, in terms of reclaiming our attention and focus. So there are people like this man, Nir Eyal. Nir Eyal is an Israeli. He used to work for some of these big tech companies. He released a book. The first ever book I bought personally about social media was by Nir Eyal. It's called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Sounds like a good book. Should have been a red flag that I bought it off an Instagram advert, but I bought the book. Best-selling book, really popular, etc. Okay. He says, take responsibility. Identify the emotional triggers that make you want to pick up your phone. When you pick up your phone, why did you do it? What's going on for you? What are you avoiding? Identify those emotional triggers. He says to time box, put your calendar into time boxes. Make sure you know exactly what you're doing at every moment of the day. He says, turn off your notifications. He says, use the do not disturb button. He even says, in an interview, he said, they gave you a do not disturb button. What more do you want from these big tech companies? And the capitalists love him. They're like, yes, yes, yes. It's your fault. Be better. Don't use your phone so much. But this guy, this is the last point I'm going to make. Well, one of the last points. Ronald Purser, another white male scientist from San Francisco State University, he said, actually, what this guy is doing and what happens to us again and again and what people do to us again and again is called cruel optimism. I love this term. This is one of the most important things I learned from Johan Hari's book. He said, they take a really deep problem with deep causes in our culture, like obesity or depression or addiction, and offer people in upbeat language a simplistic individual solution. Nir Eyal, interestingly, same guy, wrote this book as well. Only a few years before he wrote Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention, he wrote a book called How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And this book was so successful that the CEO, or one of the top executives at Microsoft, held it up to all her employees and said, everyone needs to read this book. And in fact, in the introduction to this book, he says, let's admit it, we're all in the business of persuasion. Everything we do is about getting people hooked to our apps. This is the same guy who then tried to write a book saying, but it's not us. You just use your do not disturb button and we'll figure out how to hack you behind it. So, how can we reclaim our attention? A few quick things we can do. One is to slow down. This white male scientist studies people who does yoga, meditation, Tai Chi. He said, slowness nurtures attention and speed shatters it. And the speed of this talk has probably not helped. But in general in life, yoga, Tai Chi, meditation, prayer, different forms of amal, dua, they can nurture attention, and speed shatters it. Sleep more and better. Now, I know I'm sounding like Nir Eyal here, but in general, so the interesting thing about us as a community is that we do have a bit of a superpower in that we fast. And actually, despite everything, as a community, we once a year take a full month where we refrain from the most basic of needs that nobody else does in this way, right? Like, we don't have food and we don't have water for multiple hours a day. I think there is something in there. I think we have this practice to refrain from things despite the society around us being so oblivious to what they could be doing. I don't know if that's making any sense. We have this practice of being countercultural. We have this practice of defying society's expectations every Ramadan. And I think that's really, to me, where fasting plays a role in this. Sleep more and better, eat better, cut out processed foods, as much as you can. But I don't follow all this advice. I feel really bad saying this, but the solutions in my eyes are only the last one, really. Use social media less. That's going to help you. But ultimately, the one thing we can really do to reclaim our attention is to end capitalism. I know that sounds like a joke, but I mean it in terms of once we become aware of how these issues are systemic, we have to recognize that to use social media less and to try and sleep more is like saying, I'm going to battle pollution by wearing a gas mask outside. It doesn't really work. The only thing that has ever happened, and remember that the whole mission of the Prophet started in the same way, right? The only thing that really works is to come together, is to find social movements, is to raise your awareness about how these systemic issues impact every single one of us, how they are stealing the focus and attention of us and our kids. And the Quran also says, Sheikh Tajri is like coming up with a rebuttal. But there's not many places in the Quran where Allah talks about taqwa as taqwa, actually says the word taqwa. But one of the places is here. And Allah here says, "A'dilu huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa." Be just. And given the preceding verses, I asked Sheikh Tajri yesterday, and he 100% agreed with me that this is a social imperative. This is about social justice. This is about being just in a social way. Huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa. And be mindful of Allah. Okay? Given the level of attention that you guys have paid here today, you wouldn't know we're in a crisis, but we really, really are. So thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry I've taken up so much of your time. Okay? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I don't think we have... Okay. Okay. If it's a critique, I'm not even going to repeat it. Yeah, I'm sorry.
By the way, near the end of it, just to pick up on the very start, just to let everyone know that on the phone, you're trying to scream like people. So, anyway, a lot of the stuff you said about the cynical side of this development, post-modern development, post-industrial revolution development, all true, especially the capitalistic side of it. But on the flip side, we know that our neurological connections are functioning far faster than our parents' generation because of these developments. And our kids are going to function, okay, there's a mental health side of anxiety and things as well. But that's what the negative side we spoke about some of them. On the positive side, they're functioning far faster, far more efficiently than we ever would because of advances. So on that side, we know anthropologically speaking, religion has shifted to what it used to be and how it's practiced today in a lot of ways. The concept of freedom, where the principle has changed now. Justice, what it used to mean as something good, is applied in a different way. And using Taqwa identify the fire hydrants, all that stuff. For the first kind of all these technologies, do you not think that there's a space for all of these religious values to be advanced because of that mental function becoming so much more advanced than the way it was in the past?
100%. So the questions about how the progress in these technologies have also led to progress in our understanding, our ability to compute some of these concepts, and isn't that a positive, right? Is that right? And how even religious concepts are progressing. I think there are two things I say to that. One is that this isn't a critique of technology. Okay, like social media, all these technologies are really, really important and they have their uses. There are multiple political movements, both good and bad, by the way, that have come around and that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for social media, right? So it has changed our world and in positive ways. But there's two things I would say. One is the rate at which things are changing. It's harder to imagine when it comes to our brains because they're not as visible. But it's easier to see the problem when we look at something like food and obesity, for example, right? Like things have always evolved. New farming techniques were developed and ways of growing food evolved and new machinery and new technologies. But the way in which factory farming and industrial agriculture has changed our food landscape in the last 40, 50 years has been so massive and so overbearing that our bodies, we know, have not been able to handle it. We know because of the rise in obesity, because of the rise in disease, etc., etc. Right? So that's one thing, is the rate of the change. And the second is that when these companies work for us, then the picture is different. You know this last statement, if you're not paying for a product, you are the product, right? If, for example, Facebook was truly interested in connecting people, it would be very easy for Facebook to have a feature which said, oh, I'd like to go out tonight. Which of my friends are local and available? And we could put our availability on there and we could be connected into meeting with each other in real life. But they don't do that because actually it's not in the interest of their business model to connect people offline. They need people to connect online and be looking at their screens, otherwise they don't see the adverts. If you switched Facebook to a subscription model where people had to pay for access and they're working for you, you could have very similar technologies doing very different things. Because then their interest is in actually what do you want? Not what do the advertisers want, not what do the other businesses want. What do you as individuals want and need from this technology? So there are ways of converting these technologies to becoming more useful and more satisfactory and more in line with what you're talking about in terms of progress. But the way they are now, in the system that they are now, what they're doing is dangerous. Yeah? Okay? I think everyone's done. Like, this is the most attention we've ever paid, ever. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much, Hasnain. And I think after being called a mafia boss, I think that's the word that you used, I have to say something for my own defense. So after he finally agreed to do the talk, 3 days later, I got a message from Hasnain. Salam, by the way, has any other speaker cancelled from Ramadan because I've got another idea? So, but thank you anyway, I owe you one. So our programs for next week, inshallah, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. From next week onwards, all the programs will